Hey you're invited to Bike the Barns, a one-of-a-kind food and farming adventure taking place on Sunday, September 20th in the Verona Mount Horeb area. It's hosted by Fair Share CSA Coalition. This fundraising bike ride supports local farmers and fresh food access. And for the ride, you'll get farm fresh food and drinks, live music, and farm tours at each stop. Plus, this is for all skill levels. Spots fill up quickly, so register today at csacoalition.org and pedal together for fresh food for everyone. This is CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Today, have you heard the earth move under your feet the past couple of nights? Maybe while you're in bed? That's probably the Wisconsin National Guard's 115th Fighter Wing. They're conducting evening training flights this week, running through tomorrow, Thursday, August 20th. Training flights typically take place during daylight hours, like when we're recording, but evening operations are also a part of the Guard's overall readiness. So, we are bringing back my conversation with citizen scientist Scott Pigg, who's been collecting data on the fighter jet's noise and paths. Scott Pigg, welcome to CityCast Madison.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Great to be here.
Yes, I mean, we talk about the fighter jets a lot on the show, and when we posted about it on Instagram, we had a huge reaction. So I know folks want to know more, and you're looking at this in a scientific lens, which is awesome. I want to give some context for the fighter jets, which is back in 2020, Truex Airfield was chosen as the bed-down location for a fleet of F-35 fighter jets. Despite pushback from activists, the U.S. Air Force followed through, bringing the first jet to Madison in 2023, so somewhat recently, and Madison is now home to around 20 jets. Scott, when did you decide to start measuring the sound coming from the F-35s?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. I first learned about this possibility of the new jets coming in fall of 2019 when the Air Force was circulating their draft environmental impact statement. And I didn't know anything about any of this stuff other than that we already had some F-16s here and they were pretty loud. But I was hearing things on kind of from two camps. There was one camp was saying this is going to be a noise apocalypse in Madison. These things are going to be 115, 120 decibels, and it's just going to be terrible. And then there was another camp that sometimes I call the Sound of Freedom baby camp. The people who are like, there's going to be a big economic boom. These things are, it's just going to be a few minutes of noise a week. I even heard one person say, oh, they're not any louder than a lawnmower. I was wondering, scratching my head about it. And I have a background in analyzing data and trying to get to the bottom of things. And I was also on the verge of retirement. I've spent 40 years doing research on energy efficiency products and do they really save energy? So I always had a mindset of, well, are these claims really true or not? And so one day I was out ice skating on Lake Monona, and it struck me that if they do decide to bring the jets, it's going to be a good year before they actually arrive. So why not build some sound meters and put them out in the neighborhoods and measure airplane noise levels for a while before the jets come and then after they come? And that was kind of the genesis of the whole thing.
Well, it's so smart, too, because, naturally lots of things that the U.S. military does is pretty private and they keep it under wraps. So they tell you some information, but they might not share everything, sometimes for security purposes. So to decide, well, I could do some citizen science on this is pretty cool.
Oh, yeah. Well, for sure. And the other thing that was really kind of gnawing at me is that world is full of like noise measurement and modeling jargon and people that kind of talk to each other and they throw around all these acronyms and they made these maps with this metric about how bad the noise is going to be that it seemed like nobody could understand. So my other goal was to, get these out and see what the noise levels really are, and then present the information in a way that's more easily accessible by normal people. You don't have to have a PhD in acoustics to understand what we're talking about here.
Yeah, honestly, I was one of those people trying to understand and look at the maps and figure out, because I like nature. I like silence. And I was worried. And, obviously now that they've been here, we have some experience with it. But I want to ask, I understand you have a little over 20 sound monitor machines around Madison that you put out and about. Did you need a permit or permission to do that? Is there totally above board? Anyone can just do that? Or what was that process like?
Well, the way it works is I built these little meters, and then I looked for volunteers, for mostly homeowners, to step forward and say, yeah, you can put one of these meters in my backyard. And so I come over and I put it on a stake in the ground, and then I connect up to their Wi-Fi, and it basically just transmits 1 decibel reading a second back to a computer at my house. And so they just sit there 24/7 transmitting the noise levels. And then the other key part of this whole thing is I've got an antenna up on my roof that is pulling in aircraft data, because these days all the aircraft in the area have to transmit who they are, where they are, what their speed is, what their altitude is, like every second. And then I have these computer programs that go through and say, oh, an aircraft went by this meter at that time, and oh, there's a spike in the decibel level, so that was an aircraft noise event.
Honestly, you're giving like coolest dad ever vibes, or cool uncle, or cool mentor, like having a scientist like, you know what, we're going to figure this out. We're going to build these machines and we're going to ask people to put them out. Like, this sounds like the most fun adventure, but also for such a worthy cause. Like you said, like helping the public understand what the impacts of this noise might be and just where the noise levels are at. And I can speak for myself. I feel like I personally find myself in different areas around the city and I'm like, this is a hot spot. Are there hot spots for the F-35s? Are there flight paths? What does that look like?
Yeah, for sure there are hot spots. And maybe I could start with, what the data show. And now I'm up to, I think, 470,000 noise events and 1.7 billion decibel readings or something like that. What the data show is that there's like two kinds of airplanes that are responsible for more than 80% of the noise in the vicinity of the airport. And it's the commercial airliners, because there's lots and lots of them. And it is the fighter jets, because they're super loud. So the commercial airliners are about 2/3 of all the noise. The fighter jets add maybe another 20 to 25% of the noise, but they punch way above their weight because they're only like 5 or 10% of the airplanes that fly over. So because they're so loud, they contribute way more to the noise landscape. So the airliners, Madison's got 3 runways, but only one of those is used by the airliners and the fighter jets, and that's the main one that runs pretty much north-south. And the hot spots are, if you draw a line along that runway and extend it to the south, it kind of comes out through my neighborhood and over Circle Park and then over Lake Monona. All of the airliners do what's called a stabilized approach. So when they come into land, they get lined up with that runway way out over Lake Wabisa and Lake Farm. And then they just fly that exact line all the way in, because they're all about safety. It's all being done on autopilot, and they don't want to be making last minute turns or anything, right? Because that's risky. So there's a hot spot right along that line that gets something on the order of 40 airliners a day going over it. So that's the hot spot for the airliners. The fighter jets, 70% of them take off to the north. There's not very many houses up there, but the few people that do have houses, and one of my noise meters is at one of those houses, they get hammered the most, right? Because they get fighter jets. Whenever they take off to the north, they're kind of flying that path. When they take off to the south, there's a rule that the fighters have to turn to the southeast when they take off. And usually they're taken off to the south because the winds are out of the south, or because all the other air traffic is flowing to the south. And if they wanted to take off to the north, they would have to, wait a long time for there not to be any planes coming in from the north. So when they take off to the south, they pretty much immediately turn to the southeast, which takes them out first over the Carpenter Ridgeway neighborhood, and then Hawthorne, and now, kind of think about Fair Oaks and Highway 30, and then they're kind of cutting south of Highway 30, and they're kind of coming along south of Highway 30, heading west over Eastmoreland. And then, they're kind of getting over Cottage Grove Road. And so that's kind of the hot spot for departures. Then there's a fighter jet arrival hot spot, which is that unlike the airliners, the airliners all come in kind of straight in. The fighter jets only do that when the weather's bad and they can't do what they normally do, which is what's called an overhead approach, where they come in really fast, and we're talking like 300-400 miles an hour, high over the airport, and this is like a couple thousand feet above the airport. And when they're right over the middle of the airport, they do this hard break to the west, and they do this like circling descent, and then they come in and land. So it's kind of like an oval as they're descending.
Okay, you can feel that. Like is that possible that you can kind of like hear that they're circling
Oh,
around?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And some people, if you're not aware that this is like a military maneuver that they do, and they do it for two reasons. One is to get more planes on the ground faster, because they're often coming in twos or fours or sixes or eights. And the other one is that, like, when they're in a hostile environment, they want to spend as little time as they can at low altitude away from the airport where somebody might shoot at them. So they're kind of doing this thing where they come in high and fast and then get down on the ground as quick as they can, close to the airport.
Wow.
And some people who don't know that that's what they're doing think they're just like doing laps around the airport for fun or something.
But it's actually a maneuver.
It's actually a maneuver. And the 115th, who have all the jets, they also will tell you that that's a quieter way for them to get on the ground, because when they have to come in straight in like an airliner, they have to go slower than they normally would. And that means they have to pitch up a lot and they have to hit the throttle more. So they're really loud when they're coming in slow like that, straight in. When they come in high and fast, it's almost like they're high and fast over the airport, and then they just take their foot off the accelerator and kind of coast in. So it's a little quieter.
So it's even a noise mitigation technique.
It is. And the more I've talked to the folks at the 115th, the more I've come to appreciate how much they've thought about this issue and how much they do day to day to try to mitigate it. I mean, it's still god awful loud, but it could be god awful or louder, if that's a thing. But the downside of that for some people is that has them circling around west of the airport. So now we're talking Maple Bluff, Tenney Park, and I live kind of near Jennifer Street Market. So, sometimes I get them right over my house as they're completing their circle. So it's a quieter overall approach, but it hits different houses.
Well, so let's talk about this, because I'm working audio. I think about sound waves. I look at images of sound waves. I think maybe the average person could use a little just explanation about how we're thinking about measuring sound in a scientific sense and what we're talking about when you talk about the houses on the north side that end up getting hammered. Sound is pressure, right? So can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Without belaboring it too much, but honestly, it's really good to talk about this, because it took me a while to get my head around this at the beginning, because I have no background in acoustics or anything. So, sound is just pressure waves in the air. And like when you think of waves, you think of like water waves going up and down, but this is just like air molecules getting squeezed and expanded. And it's sound if those pressure waves are happening at 20 to 20,000 times a second, right? If it's less than that, it's infrasound. We humans can't hear it. If it's more than that, it's ultrasound, and bats and mice can hear it, but we can't. So sound is just a bunch of pressure waves. And we all talk about decibels, but decibels can kind of almost lead you astray some way, because, you'd like to think that 100 decibels is twice as loud as 50 decibels, but it's not, right? And actually, every 10 decibels multiplies the magnitude of the pressure waves by 10. So if 50 decibels is the normal everyday sounds if you're outside around the city, and 100 decibels is a fighter jet going overhead. That's sound pressure waves that are 100,000 times bigger when that fighter jet goes over, right? So it's not linear at all. And to make it even worse, our ears don't scale even at factors of 10. Our ears scale at factors of 2. So every 10 decibels that you go up, you double what we perceive as loudness, generally speaking. So, 100 decibels is 32 times 50 decibels. I like to think about it this way. Think it's the middle of summer. We're sitting over at Tenny Park on the beach, and there's like 1 foot waves coming in. And that's just like the normal sound waves of the city, right? Now your friend comes and sits down next to you and you start talking. That kicks it up by about 10 decibels. So now we got 2 foot waves. Now airliner comes over and it hits 80 decibels. So now we're talking about, for the time that airliner's going over, we got 8 foot waves coming in.
So it layers with the other sounds in
Yeah,
that
absolutely,
you're
absolutely,
experiencing
and it
perception
and it
wise.
and it scales with the factors of 2. So 8 foot wave from an airliner. Now a fighter jet comes over and it hits 100 decibels. Now we're talking 32 foot waves coming over you.
That's why it feels physical. Like I often, when I'm standing outside and the fighter jets are going over, I will have a physical experience. Like I'm feeling,
Yes,
I'm
yes.
not being pushed over by the wind, but it's just like I'm being attacked. Like
Yeah, yeah.
not literally, but in a way. This is interesting about the noise and then how you perceive it and how it resonates in the body.
Yeah, exactly. People talk about it. You can feel it in your chest. You can feel your windows rattling. And another part of that has actually under measured the way we measure noise is the standard decibels we use downweight really low frequencies. Like they don't count those as much, but that's where all the chest rattling part comes from. So in reality, if we weren't using the scale that we did, they would probably even have even higher numbers.
I want to talk about the fact that you have a website that's
Yes.
pretty handy, honestly. And where those over 20 sound monitor machines across Madison are picking up the sound, live data, and that can be seen on msnsound.com. So can you kind of describe for folks what they'll see on that website? And if, for example, an F-35 jet flew over Madison's northeast side right now, like how would that
Yes,
show up
yes,
on the site?
yes, yes. So the main page for that site is it's a live map of the area around the airport with a little circle for each noise meter that shows the current decibel reading for that noise meter. And as the sound levels increase, the circles get bigger and they go from like being green to orange and then yellow and red and eventually purple, right? So if you watch a commercial airliner come in, and the live map also shows the airliners, on the map. If you watch a commercial airliner come in, what you'll see is the circles right under that path of that thing. The numbers will get bigger and they'll get up and they'll get, maybe yellow or orange or
It's like
something like that.
Fantasia.
Right,
You're really
right.
watch. It's live.
Yeah. Now, when the fighter jets take off like they did this morning to the south, you won't see the planes because they are not required to transmit that kind of aircraft data. So they're kind of invisible to my airplane tracker. But what you will see is just about every meter around the airport go to red or even purple, right? And the locations that are right under the path of the jets, they'll get up there often over 100, sometimes over 110. We've measured as high as 120 decibels. And those will get the biggest and the purplest, so to speak, right? But you will see you can just see how much louder the fighter jets are, and you can see how much bigger of an area they affect because they're loud, so the sound travels a lot further. I have 1 meter way over at Edgewood Cottage that sometimes will light up from fighter jets taking off way over here by the airport.
My goodness. I mean, you said at the top of this conversation, when you got interested in tracking this back in 2019, folks who were concerned about them coming here were saying it would be over 100 decibels, and that's where it's at. The concern is real, or, what magnitude are we dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, the fighter jets are almost always over 90 decibels if you're within a half a mile of it, often over 100, sometimes over 110, and we've measured up to 120. And I don't usually get 100 over by me, but the people that are in that southwest departure path and that poor guy to the north, they regularly get 100, 110. And when I've been over there, like working on a meter or something, it's almost hard to describe. It's very loud.
Yeah. Well, I know there's a meter somewhat nearby where I live, and I was talking to you before we got on the call about how I live in a house that has walls from the 1880s that used to be an old milk house, a farmhouse, and the walls are actually a foot deep. And you can still feel the jets when they're going over. And upstairs, my house shakes when I'm in bed and they're going over. It's just something that I think about, if not on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. And you've been collecting data on this for the last 2 years. Are there any patterns that you have recognized? I know that you've shared some already, but things that stand out to you?
Well, yeah. And I think what would be helpful would be to speak to what was the fighter jet noise before the F-35s and after. So essentially, the amount of fighter jet noise has doubled since before the F-35s. Like I had about a year and a half of data when we just had F-16s flying around. And then there was a 9-month period where we didn't really have much of anything because they'd stopped the F-16s and they went away and they weren't ready for the F-35s yet. And now I've had several years of F-35s, although they, like you said, they've been kind of gradually adding to their fleet, so to speak. And I think they just got the last jet last May. But when I compare 2025 to that year and a half before when we just had F-16s, it's about twice as much noise. And that's a combination of two factors. One is that there's just a lot more airplanes flying now, right? In 2025, we had about 30 fighter jets launching per week. Back in 2021, when it was all F-16s, it was only 20 launching per week.
Yeah, so they're just more jets.
Yeah, it's just a lot more jets, so that's a lot more noise. I should point out, not every fighter jet is a local 115th F-35, because we do get, they call them itinerant jets that come in to refuel and go in and out. And we get these training jets, fighter jets that come out of Air Force bases and come up here for the weekend as part of their thing.
As a part of the regular soundscape of the city
It's included. I can't easily tell you which is a 115th F-35 versus some other fighter jet. I know it's a fighter jet, but it's safe to say that about 90% of the fighter jet noise that I'm tracking is the local ones, because they're operating out of here, 3 or 4 days a week and 30 jets a week, or something like that. So a lot more jets. The other thing that the data shows, if you look before and after at individual noise events for specific meters, like when there were F-16s and when there were F-35s, the F-35s are 20 to 40% louder. So if you put together the fact that the F-35s are louder and they fly a lot more of them, we're talking double the amount of fighter jet noise as compared to before they brought in the F-35s.
That's intense. That's intense.
Yeah.
And that makes sense why, people are feeling it that much more. Noise has doubled. It literally has doubled.
Yeah. And people, in my neighborhood who I talk to are like, it just seems like there's a lot more fighter jet noise these days, Scott. Is that true? And it's not until today that I can really say, yeah, it is true.
I wonder, do you have any sense of impacts on health when it comes to noise levels?
One thing I can speak to is that I don't think people are getting hearing damage from them.
Okay.
Because you have to get up well above 120 to 130 decibels before like a few seconds of fighter jet noise is going to do any hearing damage to you. And like I said, we've only ever hit 120.
Is that significant hearing damage? Because I'm an audio freak, so
Yeah.
when you're like, you
Well,
hear a frequency go out, you're hearing naturally, right? Your hearing ages, but loud noises, like even if you regularly like are on a mower and that sort of thing.
yeah, it's all about kind of dose. The louder the noise, the less time you can tolerate before you get permanent hearing damage. And when you get up into the 130, 40 decibel range, a second or two of noise will damage your hearing forever, right?
Got it.
But down at 100, 110, what we see here, it's like minutes of continuous exposure before you get that kind of damage. So it's not really about hearing damage, but there's a growing body of literature that I've looked into some that people who live near airports are more likely to have heart attacks and strokes and other adverse health outcomes because, as you and I and a lot of people on the east side know, there's like a startle reflect when suddenly a fighter jet comes out of nowhere and generates 100 decibels of noise. And so probably we live with more stress hormones in our bodies. And there's epidemiological research that shows that people who live in this kind of an environment do have adverse health outcomes.
Well, a point you made earlier that I really appreciate is how you've been talking with the 115th about their work and trying to understand more about this issue. And I think the first time we talked about the fighter jets on CityCast Madison, we got a lot of people who loved the conversation. It was a group that was against the fighter jets, and they were saying their reasons for why and the science behind it. And there are others who feel some in the military personally attacked. Like there's a reason that these jets are here. The military identified a location, and just holding that all in balance, I think is important in this conversation. I don't think that we're here to vilify anyone, and also just recognize and understand the impacts of the noise on folks. Because I have to say, as a Madisonian, I want to invest here and live here. And the jets impact my daily experience. Like, I'm not going to lie. Like, I love to be outside, and just earlier this morning, I got out of my car. The jets were, doing their thing, and the birds were quieter. It just feels eerie to live with. I don't know if there's anything you want to share about, the complexity here.
I'm so glad that you said what you said because I share that opinion about. I kind of want to move beyond the debate about should they be here or not. I mean, I think that ship has kind of sailed, and for the foreseeable future, they're here. Would I prefer it if we didn't have fighter jets here? Yes, I would. I'm not interested in fighting a fight to get them to move. My whole thing is I want to, and this is part of my ambition, is assuming they're here for the time being, is there any way that we can work with the 115th to mitigate the noise? Just bring it down even from like 100 to 90 helps a lot because of that doubling thing. And I just have to say that in my every contact I've had with the 115th, everybody there has been super professional and very willing to talk. They're just trying to do their jobs, right? And they don't like being vilified. They don't really, like if you come at them and you say, well, I hate the military, you guys should go away, that's a brick wall because, right, then you're just attacking what everything that they're about. But I think there's a lot of room for conversation here where we can say, hey, some of us don't like the fact that these fighter jets are flying here, but all of us have an interest in reducing the noise exposure as much as possible. My data show that they work at this, like they do these overhead approaches that are quieter. They take off 70% of the time to the north, whereas the airliners are 50-50 north and south. So that says to me that they are making an effort to depart to the north. They never do, like a lot of their training is touch and go landings. They never do those here. They do that all up at Volk Field. And I know that as part of some of the planning process, the airport did some noise modeling about different ways that they could take off to the south. And they, produced this report that said if you take off in this certain way, it might be a little bit quieter. The 115th didn't even wait for that report to be finalized. They just went ahead and implemented it. If it's better, let's do it.
So some of those efforts are really underway.
Yeah. So I just like to foster a engagement with the 115th and see if there's a way we can all work together to, just make them a little bit better.
Yeah. And I should share, last year the U.S. Department of Defense rejected a request for $18 million in noise mitigation funding for homeowners. That was a request made by the Wisconsin Department of Military Affairs. So there's also these different jurisdictions there talking. So that was, discouraging, but the conversation isn't over. And I will say, I had one morning, I was just so frustrated because they were going for, it felt like 5 minutes, and I was outside and I pulled out my camera to get a video and I posted something to Instagram. We've got a second of it. We're going to play it quick. Just another deafening day with these military jets. Life in Madison pretty regularly. So loud. The Wisconsin Department of Military Affairs did try to seek money to help offset the noise that Northeast homes experience. That was denied. So what do we do? A lot of people, you can hear it, and I'm shaking a little bit. And now, as you described, it's maybe not deafening, but it's stressful to the nervous system when it's happening.
Yes.
I said, what do we do? And a lot of you listening, a lot of our listeners and followers on Instagram wrote in, and someone said, what? Can't hear you, LOL. So I said, oh my God, especially late night air drills. I can't imagine parents of young children, veterans with PTSD, and those with pets like myself enjoy this extremely loud and disruptive noise. It's so bad at times, I can feel my home vibrate. I can't imagine how much worse it is for those who live near the airport base. Another one, it's so ridiculously frequent. Can't imagine how exhausting it is for wildlife, too. We had, dozens of more comments there, but people clearly care about this issue. And I'm curious, how have they responded to your project and your efforts to track the noise?
I got a lot of positive response just about documenting what's going on here. Because I think if you don't live over near the airport, you don't really know. If you're over on the west side somewhere, you can still hear the fighter jets, but they're kind of a dull roar, right? And part of my goal here is to just better understand it and educate people. And I've gotten a lot of positive feedback about, like I used to just like phone into the complaint line. Now I post my complaint with a screenshot from your website showing 110 decibels. So I think, there's value in just documenting it, and people have responded well to that.
Well, Scott, you're a gentleman and a scholar, and we really appreciate your citizen science. I know this is a serious topic, and you laid it out so well. I've learned so much. I'm sure everyone listening has as well. Thank you for coming on CityCast Madison.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
That's Scott Pigg, citizen scientist studying the level of noise the F-35 jets bring to Madison. If you want to follow his work and look at the website that he built, that's msnsound.com. Highly recommend it, and we will also link that in our show notes. That's all for today here on CityCast Madison. I'm your host, Bianca Martin. Don't forget, you can support the show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Madison neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. And if you enjoyed today's show, why not share this episode with someone who appreciates data? All right, we'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Until then, take good care and thanks for listening.